For those of you, let's put it this way, Daniel, you're already studying with us at level 4, so some of the units that you've covered in the level 4 diploma are going to be leading on to the level 5 unit in manner. You'll be able to figure out that your mic out great. So you'll be able to follow up on some of the units, because I think some units that you're doing in the level 4 qualification as of now will lead on to some additional units, and they will give you a well-rounded view in terms of some of the other functions which are important in the business and strategic management side. So let's look at understanding in this particular course very briefly an overview. Now, this course we are going to look at covering through 6 units which are provided. And these 6 units, consist of 6 different functions that we will look at of the business. First function that we're going to look at is, or the first department or the function that we're going to look at is human resource. It will be followed up by project management. We'll go into a bit of strategic marketing, which is the marketing related function within organizations. We look at accounting, and then look at business law, and also look at ethics. Now, each of the units that we're going to do is obviously cover it off by doing presentations, which are the usual in the webinars, and the idea is to try and give you an overview of some of the key frameworks, the key terms, the models, so that you have an understanding on the learning outcome. And there'll be some bit of reading that I will suggest you to do after the session, and that will be from one of the ebooks which will be available for the unit. Now, let's look at starting the first unit, which is resource management. If you have any questions, you can ask me, and then if you feel that I'm going a bit fast in terms of my delivery, let me know. I can adjust the pace accordingly. And let this be a bit of an interactive session. If you have any questions, queries, just feel free to ask me. I know, Manur, when we cover some of the topics, you have done some advanced reading into some of the presentations. So if you have questions, just stop me there and we'll get into it. Now, I'm going to start off with a very basic, understanding in terms of, first, what is human resource management? Now, we look at the resources. When we work with an organization or we look at a business, different resources. There is human resource, there is physical resources, there is finance resources. Resource, as we look at as a term, there are a lot of different types of resources which a business, organization, or a large company requires. Some of these are resources which could be physical infrastructure, office furniture, things like that. They all come under physical resources. When we look at money, capital, loans, overdrafts, we talk about financial resources. When we talk about plant machinery, we talk about plant and machinery resources. If you're an engineering company or a manufacturing company, we look at those side of resources. But over the years, one of the resources which has become quite critical and important with regards to managing all the other resources is the field of human resources management. And this has actually come into play post the World War II era, because after that, the industrialization started, rebuilding of society started after the World War II. And what we got to see is a lot of people, because of industrialization, started to work in factories. So in the early 50s, early 60s, this particular, concept of managing people, or the concept of essentially managing human resource, came into existence. And what we do see is from that time onwards, it has now steadily grown into importance. And sometimes we refer to this term with the function which this resource actually accomplish, or the department, the human resources department, or the people's department as you call it, they accomplish, is also sometimes called as strategic human resource management, because they set the direction, the pace, they manage a lot of things for this kind of a resource like payroll, recruitment. And that is where the overview of human resource management essentially comes into the essence. So it is looking at the core of this particular is the core particular function of this particular type of resources, that it looks at managing people in a way that maximizes their productivity and contribution towards the organization. So when you work within a company, you are given a job description, and that job description is given because as a resource, when you work in a particular job function or a department, the aim of employment from an employer's perspective is to ensure that you're able to deliver on certain goals and objectives, responsibilities, and that is something which is given in the job description. So in a nutshell, when we talk about human resources, we talk about, and when we use the term management, what we do is we talk about the essence of managing people within an organization so that they are productive, efficient, and are able to deliver on the goals and objectives chosen for in the organization. Now, sometimes you will see that organizations, over a point in time when it's a small business, they have very limited documented policies on human HR in particular, rather than say human resource HR. As the organization grows, as the business grows, a lot of this is documented as processes, policies, practices, and the idea is everybody needs to have the same understanding of how those processes and policies work within the organization. And that is where we see the beginning of the formation of something called the HR department or the HR function within an organization. Now, if we have to define and quantify the meaning of human resource in a bit more detail, I think this is a resource now which is being recognized as one of the important contributors to the organization for them to meet their objectives, because the HR manager or the person responsible for managing people in the organization, whether it's a line manager, whether it's your boss, a department head, they all kind of do some, to a certain extent, some function of managing, mentoring, coaching, their resources or their staff or the employees that they work with, and they report to them directly. So when we look at defining it in a further bit more detail, it talks about, the ability to be able to manage your, people by using knowledge, abilities, experience, skills, and talent to ensure that they are able to do the job which is required to be done, for achieving an aim or an objective. An example: if you work within an organization and your boss gives you a certain amount of work, says, can you, say for example, develop a list of advertisement or list of magazines in which we can advertise. Now, the whole idea of doing that would be to put together a promotion plan, and that is why he's asked you to put together the list of magazines that we can advertise our products in. Now, that particular job which has been given by your manager has been given because you have the knowledge or maybe the skills and abilities to work within that function to be able to collate that information. So sometimes you will see that HR managers or people or your bosses, when you work with other people, they will give you a job role or ask you to do a particular thing or a particular job basis your skills, your previous experience, your knowledge and abilities. And that also helps them understand how to best manage and get the work done or get the work done productively from the individual. So HR is also sometimes defined as a function which, focuses on a lot of areas and aspects of, the function, but their main functions, when we look at human resources, when I talk about marketing, for example, you will see that marketing accomplishes 3-4 functions. One, it could be involved in customer service. It looks at branding. It looks at, sales promotion. It looks at, things like advertising, communication. But similarly, when we talk about the main functions of human resource department within an organization, we talk about main functions like recruitment, selection, training, development, appraisals. So as a function, this is responsible for doing a lot of key activities, but those key activities revolve around people. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, as this particular function is evolved over the years and the decades, what's seen is that keeping and retaining people within the organization is also becoming important. That means you will sometimes see performers within the organization, they end up leaving the company after a number of years is because they feel they're not getting their value in terms of their work, in terms of either wages or salaries or bonus. And what they do is they seek a change. So over the years, recruitment, which was a very basic function, has expanded into retention. That means most organizations do not want their main employees or, main people within the organization to leave. So retention and management of the talent has also become quite important. And this has become important after the year 2000, wherein you have a lot of companies which are coming up, which are .com businesses, or which are businesses now transforming boundaries. So you could have a company like Facebook, which would employ people in Asia, Southeast Asia, Middle East, Africa, Europe, and even in the US. So they need to pick up the best possible resource in terms of talent from a best possible set of parameters, and they need to make that talent work for them in the organization. So managing of recruitment has led to something called retention, and retention is the target given to HR managers to ensure that they do not have more attrition in the organization. That means they need to keep a target of less than 2% in some organizations, 1%. That means employees do not leave the organization, and the policies are planned around the areas like compensation, reward management, development, and motivation and training, which keeps the employees within the organization. So when we look at these one or two slides, what I'm trying to look at is give you an overarching view of the unit, that what is human resources management? How do we understand various different facets of human resource management? So human resource management on one side is responsible for recruitment, but on the other side responsible for retention. On one side it is responsible for performance appraisals, on the other side it is responsible for creating appropriate rewards for performance of the individual. That means if you're achieving your target, assuming we take an example of sales, you're achieving target at 100%, you get a reward. But if you're achieving 120%, you get something more than the reward. If you're achieving 150%, that is where they want to retain that talent, and that talent might be, looked at not just performance, but also training, development, and a couple of other things. Now, understanding what are the key areas or features of HRM. Now, HRM as a function, and I say marketing is a different function. When we look at business development, different function. When we look at production, engineering, these are all different functions within the organization. Similarly, HR is considered an independent function within the organization. Now, their goal is primarily to look at understanding the needs and wants of the employees working within the organization. Sometimes we've come across these terms is that I work for an employer and they are quite respectful. They make sure that all the things are available for us in the office. Health and safety is maintained. We have clean premises to work in, and all the things required for me to effectively work is provided by the employer. We hear these terms in terms of different organizations sometime you work with. You see that some organizations also produce something called an employee handbook, and the employee handbook is provided to the employees to make them better understand the various functions, expectations of the business or the organization. So here, the key features of HRM is they are concerned about people's well-being within the organization or their resources like human resources. Their aim is to understand that we need to be able to provide, function, and deliver things which are required for resources like employees to function effectively within the organization. And then to a certain extent, the HR function also looks at a bit of a policing, saying that if you work within a factory or a production line, you need to be on time. So time management, things like, performance appraisals, things like, dress, for example, providing the right gear or the clothing to be able to work is also then in that case a part of the HR function. So example here would be if you work within a motor car company like Nissan Motors or Toyota Motors, a part of your work attire in terms of the dress when you come into the production floor, when you start working, is also provided by the employer for reasons of health and safety. And that also to a certain extent in certain types of organizations falls within the remit of human resources. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now,
yeah.
When I look, what does HR do? If we ask that question, what is the role of HR? The role of HR, the moment I add that word M, which is management function to it, it is separate. But let's look at human resource. Human resource, what human resource. Human resource is a science or an art which the HR needs to be able to manage people, to be able to manage relations or relationship with people. And now this is a function which works across with a lot of departments. You will see the person in HR position typically is a person which is, or he or she is able to get on very well with people. They thrive on the fact that they are able to kind of build relationship with people across various departments. The HR managers are able to kind of, go into marketing, sales, production, engineering, administration, or manufacturing, and they are able to, maintain those relationships, because this is considered a function, but also considered a science. How do you manage people without, if it's a physical resource, like for example, you operate a machine, you're a, say a machine operator or a crane operator, you need to be able to get some training to understand how to operate that crane. But in the case of human resources, you cannot go in and do a training to understand how to manage people. This, to a certain extent, you can get from training, but essentially comes from years of experience wherein you manage different situations or different complex situations from which your experience helps you to effectively deal with different people. So sometimes this as a function is also considered science or an art. And the more experience you have, the more number of years of experience you have, or the more work that you've done in different sort of organization actually helps you to understand the function and role of human resources and its management within an organization. Now, there are some very essentials that we look at from a point of view of overarching, argument that we need to understand is that why do we think we need HR in an organization? Why do we need human resources in an organization? Why do we need somebody to work into this function? Is because there are lots of things which employees want. So, for example, you want your salary to be processed at the end of the month. For example, you want certain pay, perks, and benefits to be provided because you work for the company. It could be if you're in a sales job, you get a car, which is a part of your perk, maybe a mobile phone, which is paid for by the company. But these things then are looked at because you need these resources to be functioning effectively, to be able to deliver on targets. And that is why the function of HRM becomes important, is because they need to look after the needs and wants of people so that those are provided, and then that makes the employees more productive, more motivated, more loyal to the organization, and that allows them to accomplish tasks or challenging tasks to meet the goals and objectives. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay.
Is that okay, Venu? Oh, are you able to hear me? Okay. Now, let's check the addition of the word management. When you look at the addition of the word management, what we need to see is, say for example, when we look at the addition of the word management, what we are trying to see is that there is a process which has been put in place, and that process which has been put in place essentially allows that to happen, seamlessly. So an example, every time if an organization looks at taking an interview of a person, then in that case, there is maybe a manual or a questionnaire which has been created by HR, which allows them to follow that process of interview and selection every time there's a requirement or there's a vacancy. So things which happen time and again and have to be managed effectively, keeping in mind, example, the branding and the vision of the company. So example, a company like Microsoft or, a company like, say, Shell, if they are to hire an employee, they expect certain, criteria to be fulfilled when they look at employees or selection. Now, this cannot be something which can be verbal. This has to be documented. So when that process becomes documented, when that process becomes regulated, and that process has some SMART goals. When I say SMART goals, means those are objectives which have been set, which can be achieved which can be defined, achieved, and there is a measure of performance we can put against it, then that whole process is called, that then becomes something called management. So the process of trying to accomplish goals through other people, when you're defining policies and procedures which are followed to achieve those aims and objectives, then becomes the process of management. And if I combine that together with human resources in terms of definition, we're looking at is the utilization of people to be able to achieve objectives regularly, month on month, year on year, is then defined as something called human resources management. So here what we will see is the management or the let's put it this way, let me not use the word management, but the what I want to say is the use of people to appropriately get work done on time, meet the targets, objectives, things like that, would then be accomplished only if there is something there to manage it, something there to review it. And that's something in terms of the function within the organization tends to be human resource management. Now, having said that, let's look at what are the key functions which HR people do within the organization. What are the key things that you will expect a person within the HR department to do? Now, when we look at human resources management, there are some key functions which are defined, which are a part of this particular department. So if I am an HR manager, and if I wear a hat of an HR manager saying that I work as an HR manager for this company, what are the key things that I do? What are my day-to-day responsibilities? Now, one of my responsibilities would be to look after staffing. That means recruitment. I need to be able to recruit if there is a vacancy, if somebody ends up leaving the organization, or if there is a demand in terms of a new vacancy which comes up, that because the company is expanding, we need to recruit, say, 2 new sales managers. That function would be staffing. So we will get into that in a bit more detail, but overarching right now, just look at staffing. The second function that we will look at is if you bring an employee in and they join the organization, at some stage, you have to pay them wages, you have to give them benefits, perks, so that they are able to perform their function well. And that is something which is encompassed in something called compensation and benefits. So what we tend to do is, in that case, look at things that will provide for them to be able to work effectively, bonus, incentives, and compensation, which is salary. The third function that we look at is, in some cases, we also need to look at providing a safe environment for the employees to work. And so health and safety then becomes a part and parcel of one of the key functions of HR. That means if they have to work in an environment, in an office space, the environment has to be safe. And one of the key responsibilities of HR department is to ensure that there is health and safety within the organization. How do you see this on a day-to-day basis? Sometimes you will see there's a fire drill which happens within the premises, and everybody has to comply with that fire drill. The fire drill is being done by HR is to ensure that in the event of fire, everybody in the office knows what to do or expects. They expect the employees to understand what is to be done, how to escape the building, so that there is no loss to life, and mostly in this case no loss of life. So safety and health and safety is one of the key functions. We also look at something called development. Now, we will get into this, but very briefly, development, because if you have people working within the same role over the years, sometimes they need to develop new skills. And in some cases, you will find that if there is something new which has been introduced, you need to do training so that the employees are able to understand the use of that technology or maybe the equipment. Now, one example that I would give very briefly would be like a lot of organizations, businesses moved to Windows 10 when Windows 7 was introduced. And so after that Windows 10 was introduced, a lot of organizations have, after 2-3 years of introduction, decided to move to Windows 10. Now, a lot of employees within the organization might not have the competence to understand the new version of the Windows, and that is where HR department then works with the training a department to kind of ensure that employees which need training can get training so that they are able to understand the new version of Windows installed, and then they can work effectively. And one of the other functions that we look at, which is also there, would be something called employee and labor relations. Now, in large organizations, you will see the concept of unions, or a concept of, if you have a grievance or if you have a problem and that is not resolved by the employer, then you can retort to going to a union or a member, an external body, which will help kind of, let's put it this way, help fight your objective in terms of if there is something that you feel is not being done rightly or justly for you. So managing employees and labor, that means in organizations like manufacturing companies, engineering companies, where there are a lot of people which work within the factory floor, they have a tiered structure within HR to manage employees and relationship with employees. And that department typically tends to be public sector enterprises. And this is where you will see employers having something called employee and public labor relations as a department. So you will see most countries have unions, and these unions basically look at protecting the rights of the workers working within the companies, because sometimes the employer is too powerful, and in order to balance the employer and the relations between the employees, you will see the companies also create a employee and labor relations department. So when you have to understand, if somebody is to ask you a simple question, what are the key functions of human resource management in an organization, and how do these functions contribute to the performance or achievement of objectives, what are you going to say? What are you going to say?
Yeah,
so these are 5 or 6 functions that you will name. That, okay, human resource management is a key function within the organization, which looks at managing looks at managing people and people-related assets within the company. They are classified into 5 or 6 different types, and they would be, when you have different types of resources, but considering human resources department will look at employee relation, they will look at staffing, recruitment, selection, they will look at training and development, they will look at compensation, benefits, things like how many days of leave that I need can I get in the year if I work as a full-time employee. Now that is a part and parcel of human resources department, but that comes in compensation and benefits. What is the pay package that I have, and what is the leave package which is accompanied with that pay package? Health and safety. So these are key functions of HR when you work within an organization, and they manage these functions so that people working in the organization are able to get everything they need to be able to effectively perform and achieve their objectives. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And this is what I've detailed out, if I get in this particular slide, wherein it talks about break down into these core functions, but I to break it down into different levels of the organization. So what is the role of HR at the management level? When I say management, the chief executive, the managing director, the board level. Their main aim there is to look at creating strategy, and then making sure that that formulation of that, or the making of that strategy, is able to go for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, right? And this is where we see a terminology called CXO, Chief Operating Officer. We have Chief Executive Officer, and we also have something called as Chief HR Officer, CHR. So the person at the topmost, position within the HR department would be called CHR, which is, Chief Human Resources Officer or Manager. And that person will be responsible for formulating strategy, what kind of strategy? Human resources strategy for the organization. That could be for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Is that okay? Yeah. A simple example. There was in BBC News today, let's look at a simple example at management level. If I have to kind of quickly show that. Now, if I look at the management level, there was a bit of news from the business sector today, which basically talks about BT, which is British Telecom, is looking at making 13,000 employees redundant. That means they are going to be dropping their workforce or making 13,000 people redundant in terms of their workforce. Right? And let me bring that news up. Now that is important, and that is something which is important because it is considered, it is directly related to HR. So let me look at, here is the news. Now this, first of all, let me ask you a quick question. Do you think this is related to HR? Is this related to HR?
Yeah.
Yes or no? Yeah? Yes. So when you see a headline which says one of the biggest telecom communication companies is to axe, that means lay off, make redundant, or make redundant 13,000 jobs in the next 2 or 3 years. 18 months, it says in the next 18 months. So 1.5 years. This is a big headline because that means somebody in the top management, apart from the CEO and the chief financial officer, somebody in HR is looking at potential. They've done some work or maths behind this, and the work maths behind this is that they are looking at understanding that if the company has to be profitable, if the company has to meet its expectation for shareholders, the workforce has to be raised. That means they might be planning for the next 10 years to say that we don't need that many people because technology now helps do jobs. So they would then say that we have to make 13,000 staff redundant, and then they are also saying we'll also be hiring some 6,000 new staff, but they come across primarily in customer service and engineering department. So on effect, this strategy which is being created, that I need to get rid of staff which do not have the right skill set, but we also want to hire staff which has the right skill set, is being done at the organizational highest level. And that level of highest level is Chief HR Manager or Chief HR Officer. And that is nothing but strategy formulating. Now, this is not going to happen overnight. This is going to happen in the next 18 months to 3 years, in which they will bring down their staffing levels, but they will also simultaneously recruit people which will have the right skill sets which the company needs for the next 10 years or 15 years to grow. You see the relation? Are you able to see that point? So when we look at some of the activities now of the HR department, HR's function and role has become very important in the 21st century is because this resource, which is people as a resource, can manage all the other resources. You are having to manage finance. Who manages finance in the company? A finance manager. He has the knowledge and he physically manages finances for the company. If you have people who work within the engineering department, they manage the means. So people is the most important resource now within an organization because they have the overriding power to manage other resources, which is physical resources, financial resources, plant and machinery, anything to do with, human resources. And that is where people need people to be able to manage them effectively. So when we look at main activities and divide it amongst an organization, we will get into a few slides. You will see resourcing is one of the key functions, but it does not mean just recruitment. Sometimes at the top level also doing planning. How many people do we need? How do we recruit? What is the most effective strategy to recruit? And what phase of recruitment will happen over a period of time? And that function will be human resource planning, HRP. Once the resourcing has been done, you look at recruitment, selection, developing contracts, managing people which work for the company in different geographies. So we call expatriates. So, example, Damien, you're in Korea, isn't it? The two of the biggest companies or three of the biggest companies in Korea is you have Samsung, you have LG, you have Hyundai, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? Now these companies, they work, they have employees across different countries. So you have employees in US, Korea, Japan, India, China, Africa, Saudi Arabia, lots of places they have employees. So here the human resources department is also split. You do not have one HR department in Korea managing everything for all the other countries where the employees work. Each country has a smaller version of the HR department and they report into the head office. So because some of these companies have grown exponentially and they have offices now or operations in different countries, HR department is also, spread across different geographies and countries. So this table essentially shows how, depending on the size of the organization and the number of people working within the organization, different functions within HR can be independent functions. In a company like Samsung, one of the key roles within HR would be a person managing rewards only within the HR department. So he would be the manager who manages reward and performance reward management within Samsung. But that is only Korea, because Korea itself will have 50,000 employees or more, if I'm just, just as an example. So you will have individual people working on each of these functions depending on the size and the size of the operation of the organization. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Right. Now, another example, just to clarify. If we have a very big company, so let's say like a company like Facebook. Facebook has over 130,000 employees across the globe. Now, if the company has to dismiss an employee, there has to be a procedure. There has to be a proper process. Now, if the employee is to take the company to court, there has to be a department within the organization which will deal with legislation, right? If an employee is to sue the organization, then you will see that there is a particular department within the HR department that looks after employment legislation, and within that, those set of people will then follow it up to manage that activity. Is that okay? Is that clear? Yeah. So sometimes you will see that when we understand the definition of HR or human resources 30 years back, 40 years back, it was simple. My job was to recruit. My job was to look at benefits, incentives, and appraisals. But as the operations have become complex, lots of people are working within companies because of industrialization, because of economic prosperity. You see that there are a lot of specialized functions which have got created within the sector of human resources, and this is what is listed here. Now, just briefly, I've given examples already, but let's look at it. If you have a small business, you have owner, you have sales, operation, finance. Who does the HR function small business like this?
Sorry.
If you have an example of a small business, in the small business, there is no dedicated HR function. Who do you think does the function of HR here or takes care of HR responsibility? Yes. So it is the manager. So here, because the business is small, the director or the owner of the business also does the functions of being an HR manager. But as the organization increases, becomes big, and this is a small, medium organization, you will see that HR becomes, a separate function, because there are more than 10 employees or more than 250 employees in the organization. And that is not something which is physically possible for the owner to do. So in this case, the HR department or the HR manager actually starts to manage some of these functions. If you look at a global organization, which is present in various countries, you will see that there will be an HR vice president, just like any other operation of marketing, finance, and within that, you will have individual managers managing individual HR functions. Because the size of the organization is that big, they have so many employees, so many geographies, so many countries to work on, that each of the function will need to be looked after by a manager. And this happening is because the complexity and the size of the organization is increasing, and so is the function of HR depending on the size of the organization, depending on the number of employees in the organization. Is that
Yeah. Okay.
is that understood? The three slides. Small business, owner manages HR. Small medium business, you have to have a manager because you have many number of employees, but the manager can manage everything on its own. But when you look at a big multinational company, there, because the company has a lot of employees, lot of different types of operations, different countries, the HR function is so a full-fledged department. And in that department, you have individual people working and managing individual functions of HR, not just one manager by safety, recruitment, selection, training, and development. No, you have individual managers within the HR function managing individual functions. Now, this slide gives you some idea in terms of how the HR manager work with other departments. So the HR function is the central key, and the manager here also deals with marketing, operations, finance, other functional areas, and also sometimes deals with unions, and they also deal with other factors which are responsible for the function. So it could be society, for example. That means in general, when they look at something called your corporate social responsibility, CSR, as or environmental responsibility, so they have to create policies which will then be inclusive. So in the early 19th century, this was the model of HR, wherein what we did see was that this function was predominantly something which HR was looking in. But the 21st century model of HR has more extensive functions than initially thought of. These functions have expanded to, working closely with marketing. If there's a new vacancy which comes up, the job description has to be done, the performance criteria has to be measured, the pay scale has to be worked out. So HR has to work very closely with marketing. Similarly, finance, sometimes they work very closely with finance department to look at keeping expenses and finances under control. Some of the other functional areas they work with is engineering, depending on the companies, engineering, manufacturing, things like that. And then operations. So it means where physical products are manufactured, you see the HR role is quite critical because they have to look at having the right technology, making sure right equipment is available for people to work with. And in those cases, you would see their function also expands and they deal directly with different departments. So this slide shows the internal and external environment to which an HR manager needs to work with. So internal is all the departments, the various departments. External are when you deal with customer competition, unions, you look at labor legislation, which the countries introduce. So a company like, I'm just going to stick to the example of a company like Samsung, if they have and follow certain rules for labor force in Korea, but when they go to the country like US, they have to have labor laws or employee laws which are favorable and meet the requirements of US as a market, because United States has different legislation on labor laws. So when they have an operation in UK, they have to comply with different type of labor laws because that is what the law of the land is. So here the HR manager needs to understand legislation, and that is external to the company. So their role over the years have expanded to ensure that the compliance and legislation is also met and legal considerations are in line with the requirements of that particular country or that particular country. Is that okay? Yeah. So one of the other things that we look at in terms of going into the second aspect would be, sometimes we hear interchanging terms like HRM, SHM, personal management, or human resources planning. These are terms that sometimes we get to hear. Let me just put them on, for the sake of our understanding. So here, sometimes we hear HR, sometimes we say HRD, sometimes we use HRM, SHRM, and human resources, planning. Now, these are all different terms. Or we also hear a term called personal management. So here the word strategic has been added. Here the word development has been added. And sometimes you will see HR relations. So basically HRD, HRM, SHRM, and sometimes we hear the word, PM or personal management they have all different terms, but they are all related to human resources department. Now let's understand two key terms that we want to look at. Now first is we look at differences between HRM versus HRD. So human resources management and human resources development. So within HRM, what you will see is there is one field which the HR manager has to look at doing would be, or one of the key areas would be training and development. So after a point in time when the company or the organization has reached a particular size, what most organizations do is they start to develop their resources internally. They will put you onto trainings to get new skills, reskill, acquire new skills, and that side of the function, when you have to look at doing certain trainings across the year, or you have to reskill and get new skills to be able to perform effectively within a job role, would be the area that is called development. And in large organizations or companies, you will see that the HR department, which looks after recruitment and selection, is also different from the development side, which primarily focuses on performance appraisals, training and development, and retention. So sometimes you have to develop resources. A simple example that I would give you here would be like if a company produces steel, what they do is they start off with the raw material called iron ore, right? If you have to produce steel, how do you start? The company starts with the raw material, which is iron ore, right? Then iron ore is processed, and with that processing, what they do is they add carbon and impurities to it to then make it steel. So similarly, when you have resources within the organization and they've been working for a number of years, what you will see is that you will have human resources management as one of the functions. That means they've recruited, selected, and the people are working. But after that point in time, there comes a time wherein they have to be developed. That means because of the change in competition, marketing environment, for example, or in terms of how they need to, adapt with the moving times, the company has to retrain its employee force, or have to retrain its employees to be able to be effective and productive within that environment. And that function basically is related to which is called development. Now, when we look at SHRM, strategic human resource management is an overarching term which covers both, because SHRM looks after creating a strategy or a roadmap for human resources for an organization. And this is done by somebody at the management level. What they do is they write the strategy for next 3 years, 5 years, how the organization will grow, how many people will be required, which department will expand, what are the benefits, performance, incentives, bonuses which will be, and that is written out in a roadmap, and that is to a certain extent related to something called SHRM. And then we have something called human resources or basically personal development, and that would basically correspond to ensuring that people are able to acquire new skills within the company when they are working, and that tends to be an extension of moving people from one position to a next position. So here what you're looking at is a core function wherein you're looking at putting people into training, making sure that they have received that training, they have that experience, and then they move further into a new position, which is like a promotion. So personal management is considered as an extension of general management, but with the exception of promoting staff which are performing well higher up into the business, where they have more responsibilities, and they are able to then take on more senior roles which are important for the organization. When we look at key differences between this, And we look at this particular in the table that I've put together, is that HR is more concerned with development of skills and competencies, but personal management is more about managing people. So sometimes what you see is that people who get promoted become department heads, line managers. You get to see that these people have the art of managing people. That means they've over the years developed experience, and they now have the art of managing people to get the work done from people as a resource. So what we want to be able to do is differentiate between the two. Sometimes you will see that HR is more related to looking at the resources and the assets, or basically looking at what is provided to the employee to be able to function. But personal management will look at treating people as a resource, that this is also one of the important resource and I need to treat them with respect, and make sure that they get adequate compensation for them to be able to work effectively. So there are differences between the different terms, and these differences are highlighted when we look at the function and the nature of which we look at how we utilize this resource. So sometimes you will see that from a perspective of this decision, which is BT's decision to lay off 13,000 workers, is motivated to save money, to seek cuts, to save 1.5 billion pounds. And this is more or less an economic decision. It is not a human resources management decision, but a decision taken by HR or the HR department, the top person in HR along with the management, to look at economic reasons. So sometimes when you look at that, and when you look at the significance of this particular decision, has direct bearing on the finances of the company, and that is where you will see this decision falls not within human resource, but also falls between personal management, because the HR manager will have to look at carefully analyzing the roles and responsibilities of each and every person, and before they decide that this person is not important or his role is not important and he can be laid off from the job, will have to be pinpointed to the fact that what is the contribution, economic contribution, the employee actually makes to the business. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Is that clear?
Not really.
Okay, not really. Okay, let's put it this way. So let's look at a situation wherein a manager has been asked to fire one employee. Okay, he has number of employees working within that department. Now, how will he go out firing an employee? There are a couple of things that an HR manager would do. They would see how much each employee contributes to the business. So, for example, if we look at a sales department and the company is looking at reducing the sales managers from 5 to 4, what the HR manager will be doing is looking at these 5 different sales managers, and then would decide which sales manager is achieving the target, overachieving the target, or not achieving the target. So the one which he will decide to fire will be the one which is not able to meet the target or is not consistently meeting the target set, and that is where you will see that employee will be fired. And the decision for firing that employee, that particular manager, sales manager, would be based on the economic aspect, that in terms of contribution that the person is able to make to the company is less as compared to the other 4 who will stay in the job. Is that understood?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So sometimes you will see that there's a different hat which a HR manager will put on, and sometimes they will talk about benefits, performance, rewards, incentives, bonuses, but sometimes you will see that they have been given this difficult task to do away with employees which are not required in the organization, do not have the skill set, are not performing, whatever it is, but they have to look at managing the redundancy or the employees in that particular role through a process. And that process of managing that would be falling into something called personnel management. That means if you've been working in a company for a number of years and you've been asked to go away redundant, what happens is you get a bit of a redundant pay, that you get 2 months pay or 4 months pay, and you get some minimum benefits. Sometimes you will hear of the term called a golden handshake, or people voluntarily taking up redundancies. Sometimes in large organizations, what happens is when they have a lot of workforce, an example like Google. Google as a company, does not make any employee redundant. If they have to make somebody leave the company, what they do is they make sure that the employee has, or receives a certain number of pay or certain number of pay days that will allow that employee to receive, get into a new job. So what they tend to do is, this is something called personal management. What they want to do is they want to treat employees with respect, but at the same time, they feel that if you're not, performing well, and they want to make sure that, they want to get rid of you in the company, then what they do is they will put a process in place which will allow you to find a job or give you some redundancy pay, which will allow you to have some amount of pay coming to you every month for the next couple of months before you find a job. And that side of things, wherein the personal nature of HR comes into play, will actually fall into something called personal management. Is that okay? So there are different types of things in terms of functions. Without going into details, there are different functions of personal management as well. There are management functions and there are operative functions, and each of the function has various different key objectives that you need to be able to do. Now, if I look at management function in the personal management looks after planning, organizing, directing, coordinating, and controlling. A simple example here would be to explain these functions would be that you will normally see within HR department, if a company is to start a project, right? Or if the company is to start a new project or a venture, what they will do is they will hire a certain set of employees which will be working within that function. So what will happen is the HR will align somebody from the department to be able to set up a project team. And in that project team, they will do a bit of planning to see, okay, this project is going to last, say, let's look at a project. You're looking at office relocation. So a company like Samsung is moving from, say, one of the offices, one location, and they're moving to the other location. Now, this is a temporary job. You're not going to be moving across the year. It is a one month, 2-3 month operation. But what they will do is they will create a specific task force, and that task force will work on the directions of the management, that why the office has to be relocated. Maybe it's becoming too congested. Maybe there is a larger space required. Maybe they want to save costs, and those are management decisions, right? I know that for sure. Samsung in Korea, in Seoul, moved out of Seoul a couple of years back because they wanted to have a headquarters, and there was not enough space within that location to have that office. So the management decision was that we need to move to a location wherein we have a bigger office, less cost, and also are able to accommodate more people work within that company. And that management decision then led to something called planning. So a lot of people were asked to then look at, where could be the best location, how could they choose those best location basis the parameters or the functions given by the management. And then there was a bit of an organization put into place to find out details, leasing and all that. And at some stage, they then followed that process of, after organizing, the decision was taken, coordination in terms of, first this team will move, then this team will move. And at some stage, the whole office moved. Similarly, you will see an operative function. In operative function, there are certain key aspects which are covered, and they look at employability, they look at development, compensation, human relation, and maintenance. So the two different types of functions within personal management kind of focus on two different types of functions. One is management, and the other is operative, and they have different things to follow upon when it comes to ensuring that this needs to be done. So from our aspect, let's understand these differences. And what I will do is I will send you a bit of a handout for you to read after the session, which will clearly differentiate these two functions when it comes to understanding and also understanding the definitions. Now, last but not the least, we're looking at is what's the roles and responsibilities of HR managers. Now, we have covered certain key aspects of what HR managers do. Can you list a few examples of what could be the key responsibilities of HR managers within an organization? What could be the key roles or key functions which an HR manager does? What do you think would be the key functions?
Key function of human resource management.
Yeah.
The five factors that are recruitment and insurance of staff.
So if I have to, just before even looking at, the details of just doing a quick search on Google just to show you. But when I look at key functions of key responsibilities of HR managers, what will come to my mind is I will think of things like, we spoke about things like recruitment. Who does the recruitment in the company? The marketing manager, the finance manager, the HR manager, the administrative manager, operations, who does the recruitment? So they look at, it is done as a function. One of the key roles of the HR department or the HR manager would be he looks after recruitment, isn't it? What could be the other functions? Selection, solving employee problems, very good, Manu. So for example, if there is a problem or a conflict, or if two employees have a fight within the organization, one of the key things that will be referred to would be if it comes under disciplinary action or things like that, where will that matter be referred to? That matter will be referred to the HR manager, correct?
Yes.
So other functions could be, training. It could be training and development, as we call it, training and development. It could be, say, for example, I spoke briefly about, say, performance management, talent management. You want to maintain the key people within the company. So there, the role of HR would be to have different perks and benefits for different types of employees who are functioning at different levels. So if I have a sales manager who achieves 100% month on month for a number of years, he's a good sales manager. But if I have somebody who's achieving 150% year on year of the sales target, then I need to have a differentiation between the pay package of that person who's achieving 150% and the different person who's achieving 100%. So here the function of talent management will come in. That means that person achieving more might have a slightly higher salary or maybe get more incentive or more benefit in terms of perks. So when we look at one of the other things which I think you look at the role of HR is also something called change management or a change agent. How is a change introduced within the organization? Sometimes you get to see and hear that there is a notice or there is an email which has come from the HR manager saying that we are going to be shifting to a new office, or we have a new CEO joining the organization, or you will also receive an email sometimes there's a new employee joining the organization. So these are things that you will also get to hear from. Where will you get to hear these things from? Where will you get to hear these things from?
I don't know.
HR manager, right? Somebody's leaving the company. Sometimes you also have in organizations, they do an HR newsletter, monthly newsletter. An HR monthly newsletter. Have you heard about this?
No.
Okay, a lot of organizations, if it's a big organization, what happens is, in a big organization, if you have to make everyone aware of the things which are happening in the organization, sometimes you will see HR will send out an email to all the employees of the organization, all the offices, branch office, head office, country office, they will send an email. There is an email or an announcement that they want to do that, okay, this is going to be a holiday. So who will send that email out? HR department, isn't it? So if the HR is to send out these announcements, these emails in the form of newsletters or whatever, depending on the size of the organization, if you work within an organization like, say, Unilever, how many of you have you heard about the company called Unilever?
No. No, sir.
Okay. You heard about a company called P&G?
No.
Okay. Procter and Gamble.
No.
So P&G is Procter and Gamble. Procter and Gamble produce, things like detergents, soaps, shampoos. So they are very big. Both of these are very big FMCG organizations or companies, fast-moving consumer good organizations. So let's look at cars, Nissan, Toyota. Now, if Toyota has to announce something that, okay, this is going to be a holiday, so who will announce? HR will send out an email, but in a size of that organization, the HR manager will not send an email. The HR manager will have a department within, they will say, okay, let's drop a monthly newsletter, and that monthly newsletter will capture all the major happenings or major news and events happening within the organization. Like Toyota America has won a big order for 5,000 cars from this company, or this employee has done this much, charity collection in UK, or this employee in, this country has done, for example, this meritorious work. So all this is brought out together in the form of a newsletter. But depending on the size and the scale of the organization, HR department also has the role to actually act as a change agent or inform about news and happenings within an organization. Good news, big order you have won, this contract has been won by this geography, this employee has achieved this, or we have a new country manager joining this organization. Those kind of things are also done by HR. So all these are different roles and responsibilities of an HR manager. Is that okay?
Yes.
So if I have to do a quick search to say what are the key, functions of HR, you get your salary, you get your payslip. Who sends you the payslip every month? You get it from the accounts, you get it from marketing, you get it from engineering. Who sends you the payslip? Who sends you the payslip? HR, isn't it? Every month your salary is processed, and when your salary is processed every month, you get your payslip from HR, isn't it?
Yes.
So these are things that we need to look at when we talk about, roles and responsibilities of HR managers in an organization. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, other things that I think one of the good points which Benur has also mentioned, the other student on this session, she has mentioned that the HR managers also act as a counselor. That means sometimes when you have disputes, you have, which is what we call it the mediator. Sometimes when you have a conflict or a fight which erupts, then in those cases, the HR manager also acts as something called a peacemaker. He will kind of solve those disputes or issues. Okay. Sometimes you will see the HR manager is also the spokesperson or a representative for the company. Now, in large organizations, the article that we looked at, the article on VT, laying off so many employees. That particular article, when we looked at, we saw that this is an announcement which, has been done by the HR manager of the company. The spokesperson for the company has been the HR. VT lays off 13,000 employees. So they will say that this news has come out, from say for example, the HR department or the head office of the company, but has been set out by or has been, detailed out by, the human resources department for that company. So for example, there must be a quote somewhere which I'm trying to look at, which will say that the HR department head or the HR manager said, speaking to the latest job-saving chief executive, Gavin Peterson said, I'm really excited to deliver blah, blah, next transformation put in place by the team that will be supporting and achieving these objectives. So who is the team here? The team who has put this strategy in place, one of the team member of that team will be Chief Human Resources Officer, Chief HR Manager, correct? So those are things that we have to look at when we look at understanding the roles and functions of HR managers, and that is kind of neatly designed, defined in this particular slide. So sometimes they have an advisory role, sometimes they look at welfare, sometimes they look at general roles, which is things like salary, payroll, timekeeping, and sometimes it is to do with a counselor or acting as a peacemaker. Now, today, just to summarize, in today's session, what have we done so far? So if we look at the unit specification, what I've covered today is basically the nature and scope of HRM. And within that, we have covered these 3 tasks. What is the role and functions? What are the key functions of HR management? What is the difference between personal and human resource management? And some of the roles and responsibilities of HR manager within the organization. So if you have any questions related to this, what we've covered, what I'm going to do is, you can drop me an email, no problem with that. But what I'm going to do is, I'm going to send you a copy of this presentation. Along with that, I'm going to send you a bit of a handout, which will allow you to look at all these roles or these tasks for assignment purpose. Okay? So there'll be a document which will be about a couple of pages, 4 or 5 pages. That will give you some more detail and theory about what we've covered in terms of learning outcome 1. Okay?
Yeah.
And if you have any questions, queries, you can ask me now. Otherwise, you can also drop me an email.
Yeah. Would you upload this presentation on the Moodle?
Yes, this presentation I'm going to put on Moodle.
Okay, thanks.
I'm going to put this on Moodle as well. Right. So if there are any questions, Manu, you can ask me. Yes. Okay. We will do the assignment discussion session for this unit, maybe in the subsequent session. Because I think when we look at the assignments, for the units, what we have to do is we have to look at considering what are they asking you to do in terms of tasks. So this particular, let's look at this particular unit very briefly. So if you look at the assignment brief for task 1, now what they've done is they have given you a bit of a context or a scenario here, and then the context or scenario here basically gives you that, if you do not have any working experience and you do not have prior experience, then the idea in the assignment brief is to give you some background of what you need to assume to be able to answer these tasks. So here the scenario which has been given by OTHM says that you assume that you're working within the HR department of a company called We Sell Anything Limited. Now the new CEO of the company is asking you to undertake a few tasks because they are facing bankruptcy. That means the company in which you work is going to go bankrupt. So your chief executive officer has asked you to look at certain activities. And one of the activities that he's asked you to look at is, he's asked you to look at immediately looking at identifying why the morale of the staff is very low and how the turnover has, dropped 5 times as compared to its competitors. So here, assuming this, he's asked you to do these tasks. One of the tasks is, he says, we worked on we worked as this company long enough, but the main issues which the company is facing now is that the competitors' pay on an average is more than their pay in the market. So that means employees are basically saying that we are getting paid less as compared to the competition to the company. So what we have to do is, in terms of achieving this task, this is the scenario. This is all a scenario. Now what we have to do is we have to look at preparing a meeting between you and the team to decide. So here what they are asking you to do in the assignment is draw a mind map to show what are the various functions of HR and how you as a manager, HR manager, will look at addressing some of these problems. So here, if I have to kind of elaborate and show this to you, what we have to do very briefly in the assignment would be to first parts first. It talks about drawing a mind map, and it says traditional functions of management. So basically the task is task 1, and the task 1A is talking about functions of HRM. So here you have to draw up an organizational chart, or maybe some sort of a chart which basically says these are the functions of HR. Just very quickly. And what I will do is, from my PowerPoint slide, I'm going to pick out the various functions of HR. So if I have to pick this up, just as an example, these are the functions of HR. So basically, you have to drop a mind map, but I'm just pasting it, and this is what the task is asking you to do. Then it talks about the stages of human resource planning. So what we have to do here would be, the next step would be to look at defining. Just very briefly, I'm going to do undo with this. So you have to write the functions of HR, and that could be just simply bullet points like, it could be staffing, training, labor relations, it could be health and safety. And once you've done, what we have to do is we have to define human resource planning. So you start off with the definition of human resource planning, and then highlight in the definition of human resource planning, after this particular image which shows the main activities, and maybe pick one activity up in terms of human resource planning to explain how this is done within the organization. But here the focus will be to look at understanding the planning from a point of view of pay and benefits. Okay, that is where you have to look at. So we have covered HR function, and we have covered the various types of HR function today, and that is what is required to be done in this particular task. Okay, then it also talks about differentiate product, personal management and human resource management. So I've given you a different table which shows the differences between the two, and that can come into the assignment straight away. And the third they've asked you to do is draw a flow chart to show the roles and responsibilities of HR manager. So where is the flow chart that I've done? I've done some flow charts for you, and those flow charts basically is this flow chart. It basically talks about the functions of human resource manager, and you can use this to bring it into your assignment. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Malia, is that, oh sorry, Manur, is that okay? Okay, great. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Manur, any other question? So my suggestion to you would be, Manur, if you do a draft first task and then you send it over to me, and what I will do is I will give you feedback in terms of where you are doing right and where you are doing, where you need to make changes. So in the assignments that we are doing, my suggestion would be that if you look at doing the task and then you send it over for a feedback, and I will give you some feedback to say, okay, this is right, please add this, and I'll give you some guidelines on it. And that is how we will keep developing it to complete the assignment as we go across and read the unit. Okay? That's fine. No worries. I think today, because we were looking at getting some bit of an overview and also to look at covering the LO1, I think the session is extended slightly, but what we'll try and do is from next session onwards, I'm going to try and do the sessions within about 40-45 minutes, as I know it's quite late in Korea for you, Daniel. No problem. Okay, thank you so much for joining this session today, and what I will do is I'll catch up with you in the next one.
Okay.
Thank you.